the night Docent. The grandfather clock in the Whaley House foyer struck midnight, each chime reverberating through empty halls like a funeral bell. Nicole stood before the antique mirror, adjusting her Docent badge with trembling fingers. The face that stared back at her looked older than 35, dark circles beneath her eyes, testament to too many sleepless nights since the divorce. "First night, just breathe," she whispered to her reflection. Her voice sounded foreign in the stillness. The night shift had been her choice. Fewer people, fewer questions, fewer pitying looks from colleagues who'd known her when she was married. Besides, old houses didn't judge. As she began her first round, clipboard in hand, Nicole recited historical facts under her breath like a mantra. Built in 1857, two-story Greek Revival architecture. First brick building in San Diego. Facts were safe. Facts didn't change. Facts couldn't hurt you. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she moved through the parlor, checking that velvet ropes remained in place and display cases were secure. She paused at the family photographs, studying Thomas Whaley's stern face. "You didn't believe in ghosts either, did you, Mr. Whaley?" she murmured. "Until Yankee Jim started haunting your family." A sound like dragging footsteps echoed from above. Nicole froze, pen hovering above her checklist. The Historical Society had warned her about the noises. Old houses settled, wood contracted in the cold, pipes groaned. She'd nodded along, proud of her skepticism. Now, alone in the dark, that skepticism felt as fragile as spider silk. "Hello?" Her voice cracked. "Security systems armed, and I'm armed too." A lie, but it steadied her nerves. Silence answered, heavy and expectant. Forcing herself to move, Nicole climbed the stairs, each step calculated and precise. The second floor was darker, moonlight filtering through lace curtains, casting web-like shadows across the walls. Everything looked exactly as it had during final check. The children's toys arranged in careful rows, the four-poster bed with its hand-stitched quilt, the rocking chair angled toward the window. The rocking chair that now slowly began to move. Nicole's rational mind supplied explanations: air currents, uneven floorboards, the vibrations of passing cars. But she'd grown up in old houses, had worked in museums for over a decade. She knew how they breathed, knew their sounds and silences. As she watched, the chair's motion became more pronounced, its aged wood groaning in rhythm like labored breathing. The temperature plummeted, her exhaled breath visible in the darkness. The motion sensors remained stubbornly dark. No alarms triggered, no logical explanations presented themselves. Nicole backed toward the stairs, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her heel caught on something, a child's wooden top that hadn't been there moments before. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall, and the top began to spin. By itself. The sound it made wasn't the innocent whir of a toy, but something deeper, almost like human laughter. As it spun, other objects began to shift. Picture frames tilted, drawer pulls rattled, curtains swayed against non-existent wind. "This isn't real," Nicole whispered, pressing her back against the wall. "I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm imagining." The top stopped spinning abruptly, falling onto its side with a hollow clatter. In the sudden silence, Nicole heard footsteps again, but this time, they weren't above her. They were behind her, slow and deliberate, accompanied by the distinctive drag of chains. She turned, slowly, unwillingly, knowing what she would see, but unable to stop herself. Nothing. The hallway stretched empty before her, moonlight painting silver rectangles on the floor. But in the mirror at the end of the hall, a figure stood behind her reflection, tall, gaunt, with a neck bent at an impossible angle. Yankee Jim hanged for stealing a boat in 1852 on the ground where the house now stood. The figure raised a hand, and in the mirror, Nicole's reflection did the same. She didn't move. Her reflection smiled, though her own face remained frozen in horror. As she watched, paralyzed, her reflection began to rearrange the hall behind her, methodically moving furniture into positions she recognized from historical photographs of the hanging. The real hall remained unchanged. Nicole's head spun as she tried to reconcile the two realities before her. The rational part of her mind screamed to run, to quit, to never return. But something deeper, something she didn't want to acknowledge, felt a twisted sense of recognition. Hadn't she also been convicted without a fair trial? Hadn't her husband judged and sentenced her based on circumstantial evidence, refusing to believe her innocence? The figure in the mirror nodded, as if hearing her thoughts. When Nicole finally found her voice, it emerged as barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Her reflection's mouth moved, but it was a man's voice that answered, rough as a rope. "Justice." The grandfather clock struck 1, and Nicole watched in horror as her reflection began to walk away without her, following the spectral figure deeper into the mirrored house. She felt a tugging sensation, as if invisible hands were trying to pull her through the glass. That was how they found her the next morning, standing before the mirror, unresponsive, her clipboard filled with the same words written over and over, "The jury finds the defendant guilty." It was only the beginning? Over the next weeks, Nicole's grip on reality began to slip like sand through an hourglass. Security footage showed her wandering the halls at night, rearranging furniture with mechanical precision, holding conversations with empty air. During the day, she researched obsessively, learning that her ex-husband's great-great-grandfather had served on the jury that condemned Yankee Jim. The coincidence felt less like chance and more like fate. She began losing time, coming to consciousness in strange places within the house. The mirror became both salvation and torment, the only place she could see the truth of what was happening, yet each glimpse pulled her further from her own identity. The Historical Society noticed her deterioration, but attributed it to divorce stress. They didn't see how the house was changing her, claiming her, using her to right a century-old wrong. They couldn't see how her reflection acted independently now, always watching, always smiling that knowing smile. It all led to this moment, the final night shift, the cameras recording empty rooms while Nicole stood in the former courthouse, face to face with her reflection and the truth it revealed. The evidence she'd gathered proving Yankee Jim's innocence lay scattered around her like fallen leaves. "I understand now," she told her reflection, watching as it spoke words she didn't voice. "You needed someone who knew what it felt like, someone who'd been wrongly judged." The figure of Yankee Jim appeared behind her reflection, nodding slowly. The rope around his neck swayed with the motion. "But knowing the truth isn't enough, is it?" Nicole's voice cracked. "You need someone to experience it, to make them understand." Her reflection smiled, stepping forward until its hands pressed against the glass. Behind it, furniture began to move, forming the gallows that had stood on this ground so long ago. Nicole felt the phantom rope around her own neck, heard the creak of wooden planks beneath her feet. "I'll tell your story," she whispered, pressing her hands against her reflections. "I'll make them see." When the morning staff arrived, they found the furniture in the courthouse arranged exactly as it had been on the day of the hanging. In the center of the room, Nicole's body swayed gently, suspended from the chandelier. Her face, they would later whisper, bore an expression of strange peace. Beside her, scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, lay meticulously researched documents proving Yankee Jim's innocence. Her final report was pinned to the wall, written in handwriting that grew increasingly frantic. The jury was wrong. They were wrong about him. They were wrong about me. Some injustices can only be understood through experience. Some truths demand the ultimate witness. The medical examiner would note the bruising pattern around her neck didn't match the rope she'd used. It was wider, older-looking, as if she'd been hanged twice. The security footage showed nothing but empty rooms, though some claimed to see two figures in the background of the courthouse feed. A man and a woman, both with necks bent at impossible angles, their faces bearing the same knowing smile. The grandfather clock struck midnight, and somewhere in the house a child's top began to spin. Another night shift was beginning, and in every mirror in the Whaley House, Nicole continued her rounds, guiding others through the dark corridors of justice and retribution, her reflection now permanently part of the house's twisted history. Some say on quiet nights you can still hear her voice reciting the facts. Built in 1857, site of a wrongful execution. Home to those who understand that sometimes the only way to right a historical wrong is to relive it. The docent position remains open. The Historical Society has stopped asking why applicants run from their interviews when they pass the mirrors. They already know the answer.